Okay, hi everybody. Thank you all so much for showing up for our CWPP meeting. We're really excited about the progress we've made, and we really appreciate the input that we've gotten from a lot of you who have done input. I'm Carol Leone. I am here as the project manager for this update of the 2016 CWPP from Permit Sonoma. And I'm now going to turn it over to Tracy, who is going to introduce the rest of our core committee.
Thanks, Carleone. My name is Tracy Cattleman. I'm helping Permit Sonoma and the Digital Mapping Solutions team with the CWPP, and I'll be facilitating the meeting today. And just a disclaimer, I'm getting over a cold, so if I go offline really quickly, that means I'm trying to spare you from a cough. So don't be surprised if that happens. Let's get the next slide and jump on in. We're going to go over a couple of quick Zoom logistics. I'm sure y'all old hands by now. But basically, we'll be using the chat to ask questions for public members, steering committee members. You can go ahead and raise your hand. It should be down at the bottom of your screen under reactions. If you need closed captioning at the bottom of your screen, live transcript, CC, click on that, and that can turn your closed captioning on and off. Go ahead, next slide. If you don't have a great internet connection, I suggest you turn off your video. And if you need to, go down to audio and select switch to phone audio, and you can use your phone to be able to hear us and to speak to us today. Go ahead, next slide. If you need any special ADA assistance, you can reach out to Michelle Montgomery. That's michele.montgomery at sonoma-county.org. Her phone number is, oops, go back one more. Her phone number is 707-565-3535. Okay, so now if everybody could go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat, your name and affiliation. We're not going to be doing a roll call or anything. We'll use the Zoom participant list as our roster today. And I'm going to just briefly introduce our team. You heard from Carleone Safford already from Permit Sonoma. And we have with us, and I'm kind of looking at our list to see who else here. I want to welcome Christina Smith, who's the new marketing specialist from Permit Sonoma, and Bradley Dunn, the policy manager from Permit Sonoma, and Esther Mandano from Digital Mapping Solutions, who's the lead consultant. And we've got Roberta McIntyre from FireSafe Sonoma is with us as well. And I think that's the main members of our team today. So again, go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat. So very quickly, our agenda today, and we're already a little ahead of agenda, so that's cool. Just this brief intro, going over the agenda. We're going to start. Carleone's going to give us a brief recap of our first two meetings since we've all got so much going on, and it's been quite a fire season, which luckily is over now, hopefully, with this last big rain. So she'll tell us a little bit about what we did in March and June, so we can all be here now today. Then we're going to have a conversation about what matters, the priority values in terms of life, property, environment. And we want to hear from you about that as steering committee members. And then Carolyn and Esther are going to share this cool new project ranking tool that they've been working on. And then Esther will take us through the results of the Wildfire Risk Index, the risk assessment. Then Carolyn's going to share about the next steps in the process for the CWPP, the drafting of the CWPP, the review, taking it out to the public, your next meeting, and then the final signatories, the final CWPP for this iteration of version 2, Sonoma County CWPP. Then we'll have some time for open public comment if anybody is interested in adding any comments, and then we'll review next steps and close. So I believe with that, let me just check here. Yeah, take it away, Carleone. Tell us about how we got here for the last two meetings.
Our steering committee exists to sort of help us make hard decisions and get collaboration and buy-in from all of you in the processes that we're doing. In the first meeting, we talked about the process and the risk assessment and what we were going to do with that, and the public input workshops, which we had. There were 5 of them, which we did one in each supervisory district. And we talked about how we were going to review and create the revision of the 2016 CWPP, which will exist largely in story map format in this version. We also approved the ground rules. And one of the things when we approved the ground rules was to elect a chair, which is me, and a vice chair, who was Lisa Hewlett. And Lisa has left Permit Sonoma for another opportunity. And so we would like to propose at this time that the vice chair position be lofted over to Bradley Dunn for the rest of the grant period, which would be great. And I think that we're supposed to take a vote on that. So if all of you could in chat say yay or nay, that would be super helpful.
And if anybody is not supportive of the idea of moving Bradley Dunn into the vice chair position for the steering committee, please speak up now. Otherwise, we will assume you all agree that he's a great person to take on to support Carolyn in this role.
Mm-hmm. Great. Lucky Bradley didn't have enough to do, needed another hat to wear. Okay, next slide. Our second meeting, which was in June, we talked quite a bit about the values and assets and risks and hazards and projects as identified during those public input meetings and what we got back from the survey on the website and all of that good stuff, and sort of talked about, you know, what the public is concerned about, and summarized all of that, explained the risk assessment process, which is now pretty much complete, introduced several projects, and set up a project committee to work on the ranking tool, which we've also now accomplished and we're very pleased about. So that was our first two meetings. Next slide.
Great, thank you. Anybody have any questions about what we did, how we got where we are today, at least in terms of the CWPP Steering Committee? Cool, so we are cruising right along ahead of schedule. So we want to talk a little bit about, excuse me, priority values and what's important. And I assume that many of you have heard about the National Wildland Fire Cohesive Strategy, and or what we call the Cohesive Strategy for short. And the Cohesive Strategy has these three basic tenets. The first is fire adapted communities. And on the slide, it says human populations and communities are as prepared as possible to receive, respond to, and recover from wildfire. And then safe and effective wildfire response. All jurisdictions participate in making and implementing safe, effective, and risk-based management decisions. And then finally, resilient landscapes. Landscapes, regardless of jurisdictional boundaries, are resilient to fire, insect, and disease disturbances, and that this is all based on science. So what we want to talk about today, and Christine, if you could give us the next slide, is this idea of life, property, and environment. And is that something that we want to put in order to, or want to consider all equal, or some other combination? In Napa County, for example, when they completed their CWPP this last spring, they decided to put life first, life, then property, and really focused on evacuation routes. Other places have not done that, and they've decided that everything is equal. And this matters in terms of our project ranking and what's important and what we're going to show as the priorities in the CWPP. So with that, we thought we would open this up for a conversation with all of you. And I am going to turn it over to Bradley to lead that conversation. So take it away, Bradley.
Hi there, everyone. Thank you so much for your votes of confidence to name me vice chair. Felt a little bit like high school there with the awkward silence. But my name is Bradley Dunn. I'm the policy manager here at Permit Sonoma. And a little bit of background about me is that I specialize in communications, outreach, and engagement, and policy formation, largely through soliciting input from groups like this one. I am not an expert on communities' response to wildfire, and so when we were thinking about holding a conversation about how to, discuss these different efforts, whether we should be in a ranked order, 1, 2, 3, life, property, the environment, if we should have all three of them equal, or have life above environment and property and have those in a second tier. Those were some options that we as a group preparing for this meeting came up with, but we really wanted to talk about why those values are important. So we wanted to start with attributes and talk about the attributes of each of these values. So an attribute is something like, the environment gives us, economic development in terms of tourism or forest products. That's an attribute that's positive in terms of protecting the environment. Protecting property has attributes, including that it's houses provide shelter for people. So Christina Smith is going to be helping me out, and we are hoping that we could have people raise their hands and kind of contribute attributes. And Christina, if we could go to the whiteboard, please. So the first attribute that I'd like to actually start on the right-hand side, we're going to work right to left from this. Why would protecting the environment be a good idea? What attributes are, things that the environment provides us? So I got Esther saying clean water. So clean water is definitely a important attribute. We pay, millions of dollars to treat our water that comes from the environment, so that it's drinkable. If we have pristine water, that's good. Carbon sequestration was another one that we saw. So besides carbon and biodiversity, recreational and spiritual value. I think we should separate those two. Wildlife habitat, clean air, and visual respite. I like that one. I think that goes into, that to me aligns a lot with the spiritual value. That sense of peace and calm. Recreation, we've got another vote for recreation. Does the environment provide us economic benefits as well? So protection of living resources that may take decades or centuries to recover from loss. We got forest therapy, which I think is that spirit, group with spiritual value. Things that I think about, the environment also provides us, forest products that have economic value that, there's also tourism, besides personal value, supporting food webs and pollinators. I like that one. And I think providing forest products is one that could be added. Agriculture, I like that. Related to source for diversity in food crops, that's good. Educational opportunities, I like that. Rangeland grazing, those kinds of things. Fodder. Yeah, I think streams provide ground for fish that we eat. Hunting, I think, is another thing that the environment provides. Mosaics of healthy native plant ecosystems support pollinators and food webs, water storage, and flood protection. I think that's a great one. Cultural values, including indigenous values relating to land and stewardship. That's I think that kind of ties into what Esther was talking about spiritual value, but I think that's a little bit more specific in a way that's important to highlight. Replenish aquifers. Great. So it seems like there's a lot of things opportunity to collaborate with neighbor jurisdictions on common priorities, definitely. I think there's some health value here to relate to. And we talked about clean air and night sky viewing, which is that visual respite. But I do think that, when we don't have the environment, moderating extreme heat, that's a good one. But when we don't have the environment, what negative effects to human health are there? I think that's something to, we've talked about clean air. That's, extreme heat is another good one. Helps maintain, water availability. So I think all of these things are important, and that's, a good reason why protecting the environment and valuing the environment in these projects could have value for our community. Let's move to property at this juncture. Why? What are some values or attributes related to property that make protecting property valuable? It really seems like the conversations I've had, and again, I'm asking people to explain this to me like I'm 5, right? We're getting down to the base level. So we've got it provides shelter. It can be too costly to rebuild. Property centers community, and human connection to the place. I like both of those from Rosa and Monica. Maintain community interactions. Destroyed buildings become a serious source of hazardous materials that damage the environment. Sam, that's a good one. Stability for daily life. Definitely. Not, having, losing your property has a really challenging impact to one's psyche. Whether that's in a fire or a robbery or any of those kinds of things, it really can impact us. So stability for daily life, critical infrastructure, and then pays for environmental improvements and projects. Natural resource depletion to rebuild. I like that one a lot. Thinking big picture. And I would add, some people don't rebuild, right? And so that's displacement. It's not just when we can rebuild. I think we talked about too costly to rebuild was something that came up earlier. I mean, some of these things seem obviously self-evident, right? But it's always good to kind of list these things and to think critically, as if you were talking to, a niece or a nephew that's young and kind of explaining the values behind these kinds of things. What other, but so site not allowed to be rebuilt due to current codes. Yeah. So that's one we should add, Christina. The sites not being allowed to be rebuilt due to current codes. Housing shortage, I like that one. Emotional distress. So I think, so history. Oh, that's a great one, Yvonne. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of history in places and in buildings, both architecturally and in the, in the things that we keep within them. Does anybody have anything else to add to the property category? How are we defining property? I think that's a good question. I've kind of been thinking of property as something physical that, in the conversations that we were having to kind of set this up, we were thinking about, a firefighter's priorities when coming to, a wildfire as kind of a basis. So we would be thinking of property as, everything from homes to build, buildings, vehicles, structures mainly, but also the things we keep inside structures. I would probably also include pets and livestock there. So the economy was added. Economics and the economy have been mentioned a couple of times. So I would say, livestock would also be something that, would be considered property. So those all have economic value. So I think that we're going to move to life, which I think is one of the things that, so loss of income from rentals or livestock. So, and, I think the other thing that we can, kind of, when I was in high school and we used to do debate, we used to say that you needed to terminally impact an argument, which meant take it all the way down to its bones. So it's not just a loss of income, it's what that does to people. Loss of income destabilizes people's lives. It puts them at greater risk for health effects, for becoming homeless, for being isolated, those kinds of things. So I just want to add those to the property list. So this is going to be the easiest one, which is why we kind of, even though it's usually considered first, we decided to go with it last, because most people believe that there is inherent value in life. So that's something that we can add to life. But what happens when we lose people, in these fires? What is the impact of that? So I'm not seeing a lot in the chat, but I can add some. Yeah, healthy families is one, a good one. Losing and healthy communities. Losing people can have generational effects where it devastates families for generations. These are people's parents. These are people's children. And I'm not going to belabor the point here. I think that most people kind of understand, the inherent value of human life. And so kind of now that we have kind of listed out some of these attributes, to think about why these attributes, so economic impacts to future generations, for life, has been added to the chat. So now that we've kind of thought about these three values and the attributes that attain, or that make up the values that we have, kind of want to go back to the slide before this, which talks about how we should value these things. All three of these things clearly have important values. So I want to kind of open this up to people. Should we rank them, or should they be equal? We have a, what Carol Leone has told me is the way a firefighter will, assess a fire: life first, property second, and then the environment third. We have an option for kind of a life and property and the environment. And then we have a final option that is life is the top priority, and then property and the environment. All, like, the way we think about this, it will have an impact on how we prioritize projects within the CWPP. So, can somebody raise their hand and talk to me about which I think a good place to start is, should life be at the top of the pyramid, or should life be something that's included at an equal level as everything else? Doug has said that all fire survivors I've spoken to strongly prioritize life over both property and the environment. Does somebody agree with Doug, or does somebody disagree with Doug and want to talk about whether they think that life should be its own on its own at the top of the priorities?
Jason has his hand
Jason.
raised.
Oh, I'm sorry, I can't see.
Go ahead, Jason. You'll need to unmute yourself.
Well, I guess just addressing that, I don't think you're going to find many people who are going to say that any of the other factors are going to be more important than people's lives.
Okay.
So I don't really think that's going to be a major point of contention.
Yeah.
One of the questions, though, that I have before I could really talk more about that is sort of what we see the value of the CWPP being, and how that ties in with other planning efforts that might be more like the CAL FIRE unit plan. And so, for me, I'm a forester, right? So obviously, like, it's pretty easy for me to be focused on sort of our landscape level efforts. And so I'm just wondering, in terms of like, with CAL FIRE having their planning processes and an event, like what are we hoping that we get out of this CWPP? Maybe it's helping direct funding for grants for different projects that are happening, and is like, I wouldn't want to put the environment down low, right? Because in my opinion, figuring out how to manage landscape-wide fuels are sort of like figuring out how to solve the long-term problem, and everything else is like an immediate necessity, because obviously lives and property are important, and we're going to be having these fires in the near future. So I guess it's really sort of a question to CAL FIRE, is like, if we're ranking projects and we want to go 1, 2, 3, life, property, environment, does that mean that we're going to prioritize defensible space funding and roadside stuff And when there's no more money left, we're not going to do, fuel breaks and prescribed fire out in the wildlands, which I don't think that that's the case. But hopefully that makes sense, that I'm not like anti any of these things. I see a need to do them all concurrently. But if we have to come up with a ranking, maybe how does this plan fit in with other plans that might be addressing all these things at the same time? That's my thing.
Thank you. And so we've got Sasha, and then Paul, and then Ben Nichols. So we can go ahead and go in that order. Go ahead, Sasha.
And can I just say, this is Lisa. I don't have a hand raise option. So when you're ready, just let me know. I just have a tap to speak option.
We'll add you after Ben. Go ahead, Sasha.
Hi, folks. So I'm not sure that this question works well for planning a CWPP, and I might be wrong on that. But to me, that asking whether life is more important than property or the environment is very much I think that's a suppression based question, and suppression deeply embedded idea, because of course when there's a raging wildfire, you're going to be trying to evacuate people as your primary goal, and then you're going to deal with people structures, and then you're going to deal with containing the fire. So it makes perfect sense when you're in full suppression mode on an active wildfire. But I think from a planning context, that's actually not, I don't think it's the question to be asking, because I think it's misleading. And I think that there are all sorts of things that we do for improving structures and improving roadways that are dealing with property and the environment, but they're also improving the chance that people will survive a fire. So I would just maybe say it's a frustrating question because it's deeply embedded in the suppression piece, when I think we should be thinking bigger and more deeply in the prevention side as well as stewardship side, with even the CWPP, and changing our kind of perspective around this entirely.
So when you say we should be thinking deeply and kind of changing our perspective around this entirely, what kind of framework? I mean, we have to evaluate projects, right? So how do we say that, we have a limited amount of money, this project should be something that is one that gets a high ranking and a high priority for us to fund out of the limited dollars that we have? I mean, everything is connected, and I think that was part of why we did the exercise earlier to talk about the values, right? Is to see if things are connected, if there was something that was inherently we wanted to prioritize. So I would just throw that question back and say, how do we allocate limited funds if we don't have a prioritization set?
And I'll remind you, we're going to talk about the project ranking tool next as one of the ways that we are doing that ranking. And so we wanted to hear from you all are these all equal to you given everything else? So once we do the project ranking, should we be putting more emphasis on one of these three values, or do we address them all equally based on the project ranking, based on the science, based on the risk assessment, et cetera? And with that, let's go next to Paul Lowenthal.
Hey, I'll try to make it quick. So I never really looked at life, property, environment just purely from fire. I think it's everything that I've ever dealt with, whether it's flooding, all types of assessments. I guess my question back to you, Tracy, whoever would be more appropriate for, is life, property, and environment not part of the National Risk Index or assessment? Is that not a federally recognized kind of risk level?
Well, that's why we started with the cohesive strategy, which really shows everything being equal. It's site specific and based on whatever happens, whatever the priorities are at the local area. But fire adapted communities and resilient landscapes are equal in terms of the national cohesive strategy.
But for risk, for ranking life, property, and environment, regardless of what's felt within the group, that's I guess what I was trying to figure out offline is life, property, and environment not already recognized at a national risk index level, like through FEMA or somebody?
Carleone, do you want to add anything to that about FEMA?
think that FEMA in general is going to prioritize, most of the FEMA, and I'm kind of making this up on the spot, so don't hold me to it, but the grants that I've written are, one of FEMA's criteria is that any fuels treatment that they will fund must be within 2 miles of a structure. So that tells me that they're, largely concerned about protecting structures and lives as well. But that's FEMA, and FEMA is emergency management, and emergency management at the end of the day it's about people, right? It's about managing an emergency. We don't have to manage an emergency if it's if people aren't involved. So I think that people are high priority, people and their stuff, life and property. For any federal grant, I think they would be.
So I think we have Ellie.
Actually,
Lisa.
Bradley, if you could wait, I've got it. We've got Ben and then Lisa and Ellie. And again, this is a community plan and what you all think, not necessarily what FEMA says. Go for it, Ben.
Well, Tracy, you hit the nail on the head, is that the end of the day, this is the community wildfire protection plan. So it is community life property oriented in the federal government system. So I'm really concerned that if we get distracted from what are the priorities for emergency services in protecting communities, this document is the foundation for grant requests to both the federal government, state government, and other entities. So Sasha's spot on, and I'm sure there will be others that speak to that same deal, that we need to address what is the natural environment component of this. But as far as the community wildfire protection plan, those are industry accepted standards. And I think if you deviate from that, you're definitely making the triage process much more difficult in project prioritization, but also bringing the document into question for grant requests outside of the county.
The CWPP process actually is not that specific in the Healthy Forest Restoration Act. So, and that's kind of the magic of it, the beauty of it, and it is open to interpretation at the local level. I'm sure that that's CAL FIRE's approach for it for the state, so that's totally relevant and valid. And with that, Lisa, you have the floor.
Make sure I understand Ben's comment first, which is that it could be a problem if we deviate from the hierarchy. So we were saying
We are having a
in
hard
order to be compliant with where we might be going for the money.
Lisa, we can't hear you.
Need this plan to put life first. Was that your point, Ben? Or?
Lisa, you're super choppy. We can't really make out what you're saying, or at least I can't make out what you're saying.
But what I think I heard you say was you
Of course, I
were
think Ken
asking.
would drop. Okay, so I'm going to try to.
Yeah, I would just try
I'm
typing
in a bad
the
reception
chat.
zone, but I'm going to improve in 2 minutes.
Well, let's try to
come
get
right
back to you in a few minutes. You also have the option of typing something in the chat that'll require a little less data. So I think Ellie is next.
Yes, go ahead, Ellie.
Yeah, hi, thanks. I think maybe this is following along in what Sasha was saying, that I think there's a deeper question to help focus what we're talking about. And it would help me understand a little bit how to answer this question, but how will this ranking affect the way grants are made? Whether it's, I think, as I said earlier in the chat, it's all interconnected, and it is a community wildfire protection plan. So we are focusing on protecting roads and communities, but at the same time, managing forests and wildland habitats is going to go a long way to protecting communities. So I think I'm having trouble understanding some of the deeper machinations or gears that are going on in how this ranking will affect setting priorities. And if someone could help explain that, that would be great.
Carolyn, do you want to address that? And then we're going to need to wrap this up. I know we've got Jason and Ben both wanting to speak, but go ahead, Carolyn, and then Jason, Ben, if you can be really quick.
Yeah, I would agree. It is really hard to tease these out. And when you're drawing a project boundary, you know, do you say, yes, I'm protecting lives because I'm reducing fuels? Well, you might be with some projects. Some projects have a more strictly environmental habitat resource focus, which is fine. It's just a different focus, but it is hard to tease them out. I kind of hope that large projects incorporate all three elements so that somehow we're working in the wildlands in order to also help protect homes and lives on the other end. But it's difficult. And I think that's why, judging from the chat, that's why Esther and others are sort of like feeling like equal, balancing all three of them with equal values is important. I don't know if Ben or Jason is next.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I guess I would go with, if I were coming up with prioritization and rankings, I think that feasibility would also be something to be considered. So how simple is this to get permitted? How simple is this to be funded? Kind of bringing it back again and still throwing out this question of something that Ben had said kind of triggered that I wanted to speak up was just different grant funding. And I know that grant funding is changing, especially now, my God, there's so much more money going at this than there ever has been before. So I don't want to like pigeonhole it, but I wonder if that also is something that you would consider, like, is this CWPP process more of a COPE group activity of getting people in and out, or is it really more of a framework for doing all three, life, property, environment? I would kind of hope it's all three. And I would kind of hope that we just kind of have these bins that don't necessarily have, oh, we're only going to work on the life stuff, or only going to work on the environment stuff. More so that it would just be like, hey, these are really important projects. They cover 1, 2, 3, and here's a easily fundable way that we're going to do this. And it's exempt from such and such CEQA process, or they have that ready to go. And they have, more importantly, like the landowners are ready to go. Boom, that's a high priority for me. It's ready. Like, let's support that. That's what I would think.
Yeah, I think that we're gonna talk about the priorities. I think that's a good transition into the prioritization tool. I just want to thank everybody for participating in their feedback. And
it wasn't to cut Ben off either, because I did like have a question for him in that way. like what was his thoughts in terms of how the unit fire plan works versus the CWPP, and how do these two things fit, or how do they complement each other?
Yes, thank you. Ben, would you like to have the last word?
Sure. So to kind of tie into that conversation just now, in that to the discussion about the environment, exactly what Jason was just saying is that the more things that a project can check off between those priorities makes it a more appropriate project, or a higher priority project. But using that ranking structure, if you have two landscape resiliency projects, be it prescribed fire, be it creating a more resilient environment, if you've got a project that's at the end of Fitzpatrick and a project that's at up in the Mark West drainage, obviously the life priority, the life threat, life and property threat coming down the Mark West drainage, we can all agree is a significant factor to that. So if those projects were running neck and neck, both pure fuels projects, not fuel breaks or home hardening specifically to life and property, it's truly an environmental project, but with the added triage ability using the life, property, environment to help focus on what are the most critical projects first. And then to Jason's point, in the fire plan, that drives our fire plan. Those priorities in that order, life, property, and environment, is what drives everything we do, because we cannot replace human life. We all are aware of the catastrophic impacts to loss of property, and obviously environment is as just as important. But if we have to take one or the other, that's the final one as we approach these projects.
Well, I think that gives the project team a lot to think about, and we really appreciate the feedback. And I think that kind of concludes where we are, and we're going to talk about how to prioritize these tools. And I think that's or these projects with our project ranking tool. And so that's a good transition there. Thank you so much, everybody, for the discussion.
Yeah, that was really interesting, and it was kind of hard to throw it up here because it seems, to some of us, it seems like such an obvious question that it's hard to even have the discussion about it. But the more we thought about it, the more we sort of we just needed to get everybody's buy-in on the idea of it. And we'll be discussing more where that the rubber hits the road with the ranking tool as we go on. So the reason that we did the ranking tool is that what we're hoping to build to is to have a single place where everybody in the county is entering projects, groups, individuals, communities, whoever has an idea of a project can throw one in here. This will help us to know what everybody's doing or wanting to do. And it also, because of the way we set it up, which is it's not super easy to fill out. You have to have thought about the project. How much is it going to cost? What's CEQA? What's CEQA? You have to have thought about some of these things so that you can answer these questions throughout the thing, which we were calling our sorting hat, right? Between someone who's just saying, I want a project to put in because there's a eucalyptus 5 miles down the road and we're all going to die, which is, we did get some projects similar to that that were entered during the public meetings, right? And that's kind of not what this is about. This is about larger scale, more carefully considered projects. So that was our idea of it. This was based on the ranking tool that we had in the 2016 CWPP, which in turn was based on a tool that we got from Modoc County. And Roberta and I massaged it quite a bit. Then we got a group of you guys from the steering committee to sort of ping in on how we can change it and make it better. And we got a lot of really great comments from folks. So that's where it came from. And thank you all for your input. And Esther, I think you're going to take the next round.
Actually, Caroline, if you want to summarize a little bit of that input from the project committee, or.
Sure.
Yeah.
We got, next slide. We got all kinds of different discussions, and at the end, a lot of it came down to, what are we doing? Are we trying to identify fundable projects, or are we trying to identify projects that accomplish the values of protecting life, property, and the environment? And it was sort of interrelated and hard to tease out. It's an interesting sort of thing to think about. And we ended up sort of trying to do both. That's where the financial categorization came in. At one point, I was suggesting that should we rank very small community projects? Should they get bonus points? Because they're not going to have all this other stuff when we rank their values. We considered using complexity as a criteria. Cost share. Is this a project where the community we already know? Yes, we have 9,000 hours of community labor that is signed up and ready to, should that be a criteria? And then we also got a lot of requests about considering explicitly traditional forestry methods for woody biomass and other criteria. So we changed a little bit of the language in one of the priority points. And I think that Esther is going to run through that, but we're really hoping that most of you did take the time to jump on and run through the survey on the hub site, or through actually you should use the link that was in the invite to take a look at the tool. And if you haven't done that, I'd really recommend that you do and let us know if you have any further feedback. We're going to need to solidify it super soon, so you'd have to do that quickly. So next slide. And
so like Carleon said, you can access the version of the project tracking tool, which is now online, using this URL. You can also access it from the hub site. I did put it up there, but this will just get you there a little bit quicker. And before we leave this, before I run through, I was going to do a live demonstration of it, but if I don't know how we are on time. Are we still on time, Tracy?
Yeah, I think if you can do it quickly, we're good.
Okay, all right. And then we'll talk about Fire Safe Sonoma as the custodian later.
Yeah, let's end with that.
Okay, so I'm gonna, Christina, I think I'm going to share my screen real quick and I'll just run through it. I'm gonna make sure I have it up.
And the link is in the chat for folks who haven't seen it in your email.
Yes, and you can also access it from here, just to show that I'll show you. So just real quick, all I'm going to do is just explain what we're looking at. So we have a brief introduction here. If you think I should add more, I didn't want to add too much. Our initial feedback on this whole process was that it was taking too long. So, if we can minimize the amount of reading, but I also understand that, we have to explain stuff. So the first part is just the actual list itself. So as people enter in projects, the list, it'll automatically update a Google Drive spreadsheet, and it's there for everyone to see. So that may be something you may want to be aware of. And just on the second tab, if you click on this area, it'll allow you to actually interact with the spreadsheet. But all it is just a spreadsheet, and it's the actual data that you enter in, and it'll show up there. You can also pop it out into a new tab if you're having difficulty looking at it on that page. If you continue scrolling down the main page, then you'll get to the point where you can actually enter or access the ranking tool, and it's a survey. I had initially embedded it here, but because there was so much text, there's a lot of text. So a lot of explanatory text here. I also provided a list of the questions beforehand. So in case it's 10 pages long, there are a lot of questions. If you want, you can download this PDF, and you can slowly go through all of the questions beforehand before you actually fill out the survey. So that's provided there. And there's also a web application that I'm trying to marry to so that we don't have to go to it, but prior to this meeting, I haven't figured out how to do that. But this application can be used to answer some of the questions that you'll be asked in the tool. And so if you click on it, it just opens up a survey. Again, there's some explanatory text, and then you can just start taking the survey. All of the questions are required. So that's maybe another sticky point. It's that you do have to answer something. If you can't answer it, you can always put, unknown or not applicable or whatever may be the case. And then at the bottom is just the map of the projects. And as the projects are entered, it'll show up on the map. And that's it.
And Esther, so this is gonna have a life of its own and continue on after the CWPP. So the idea is that right now we want people to get everything in now, in the next few weeks, the next month, I believe, and then this will continue to live online. And so this is the one of the questions we have for you all is, are you okay with Fire Safe Sonoma being the custodian of this list over time once the CWPP is done? And again, that's something y'all can just put a yay in the chat. And if anybody thinks not, please speak up now. And Esther, can you speak just a little bit to that timeline?
Well, it's unfortunate that the oh, I'm sorry, I'm a little tongue-tied at the moment. The CWPP is, it's a static document, right? There'll be parts of it that are online, but the part that people have to sign or may sign is going to be static. So at some point, I need to, compile the list and put it in the CWPP. And so there's no deadline for the online list. Obviously, as you said, it lives online. It's there until it decides, it breaks, or the county decides to take it down, or Fire Safe Sonoma decides to take it down. But so there's no deadline to enter it, but at some point I'm going to access all of whatever's there and list it in the CWPP, and that's probably going to be in the next couple of weeks at the most.
And I believe that we can have the project spreadsheet as an appendix to the plan, which means that you can update the appendices. You can't update the plan, but you can update the appendices.
Correct.
And so we can update these projects on an annual or biannual basis, which is a great opportunity for people to come together and sort of talk about their projects, talk about their project rankings in a collaborative, all-inclusive fashion that everybody could join. And that's where we really hope that Fire Safe Sonoma can kind of step in to keep that moving after our period of performance is over for this grant.
And I'm seeing everybody saying yes to Fire Safe Sonoma. So thank you all. And thank you, Roberta, for you all being willing to take that on. And Esther, could you put the link to that document with the questions actually in the chat so folks can see that? Because I think it's important for you all to look at that from the last conversation we just had about priorities. And, Jason, you mentioned project readiness, and others mentioned other things that would be important in terms of ranking. And I think you'll find that this document really addresses that using a point system. And I like it. I haven't seen anything like this up to now, and I worked on a lot of CWPPs, and I'm hoping this could be a model to be used in other counties as well. So take a look at that. If you've done any grants, then you're going to see that this is a lot of the same information, hopefully a lot simpler than writing a grant. But it also, as you develop this, I think you'll find that you've generated most of the information you would need for a grant. And just FYI, I heard the next round of CAL FIRE grants might open in January, so this will be good timing for what gets generated out of this list. So any comments, questions, discussion about this ranking tool? Go ahead, Lisa.
Well, hi. Sorry, I was just in the very worst reception when I had my...
No worries. Go ahead.
So I'm all for Fire Safe Sonoma sort of being the backbone of this. And so I'm also curious about, if the document gets done, but is there an opportunity, and where they would need to be funded to do this, but to kind of curating this process and helping the community abreast of sort of the component of this, like, are we going to be sort of tracking how we're doing active implementing?
So I think you're still breaking up a little bit, but it sounds like you're talking about how are we going to do the long-term tracking, monitoring, implementing of that. And yeah, perfect. Roberta, go for it.
Yeah, thank you for that question. That's a very good question. I just see a phone number, so I don't know who posed that. But I am imagining if Fire Safe Sonoma does become the custodian of the document, for lack of a better term, it's a living document, of course. I am conceiving of a board of people or a committee that would convene probably no less frequent than twice a year and just kind of get together and look at the projects and make sure everything's the way it's supposed to be. I don't feel comfortable relying 100% on the machine prioritizing the projects. I also feel like it's very important to have not just the influence of Fire Safe Sonoma kind of influencing how these projects land. I feel like it's very important to have a group of humans kind of looking at what's coming in and asking ourselves, does this look correct, or is there something weird here? Do we may need to make a phone call to somebody to make sure that this information is correct, just for a little bit of human oversight? So I imagine like a board of like 6 individuals throughout the community, maybe representatives from local fire safe councils, something like that, who would, like I say, convene once every 6 months to just kind of do a check-in to make sure this all looks right. That's how I imagine it. We haven't crafted that exactly yet because we don't know if we're going to be the custodian. So as this evolves, I would definitely be advocating for that. I hope that addresses your question. I'm not sure that it does, but I think it might.
Thank you. And Ellie had a question in the chat. Go ahead, Ellie.
Well, I guess my question is this time to mention a recommendation that we came up with for modifying the local considerations? There's a question in there that we thought could use some improvement, but I don't know if this is the time to do it.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, I don't actually have the specific question that we wanted to modify, but it's the ecosystem health question. And I'm just going to read what we wrote. We actually sent this to Caroline earlier. So that question is missing a major point of addressing unique treatment approaches based on plant community and the current conditions. So instead of the current version, which focuses on basically timber concerns, we would reword it to say, is the project designed to preserve the integrity of the particular native plant communities, wildlife, and waterways in the project area? And if it's important to keep the timber considerations like insect and other plant diseases, then we would suggest adding that question.
Okay, go ahead, Caroline.
We just got that email this morning, so we didn't have time before the meeting to change the language in there. But I would guess that we'll modify it to include something similar to that.
Okay, great. Yeah, I didn't know if that needed to be sort of discussed within the steering committee or if that was something you'd just take care of. So thanks very much.
Thank you. And Lisa, did we answer, or did Roberta answer your question?
Yeah, she did. And I think that sounds like a great process. And again, like almost a project that needs to be funded. I don't know if we should put a project in the CWPP to have backbone organizations supporting the CWPP. Maybe that's the way. And the only other comment I would like to make just to catch up where we're on the ranking, I think that you should think about the idea of the ranking thing, that if there's multi-benefits, that actually helps bump it up in the ranking. So you're not going this versus that versus this all the time. Although I personally do think safe should be the starting point, but that you actually have a criteria, which is, does this project serve multiple benefits? And then that helps. That could be
It does do that. Basically, you get a 1 point in a checkbox for the benefits that you're driving for the thing. And if you run through it, you'll go ahead and open it up and run through it with name your project, fake project. And you can mess with your rankings. What if I don't do community outreach? Oh, I just lost 3 points. What if I do? And one of Ben's concerns that he presented to us about the tool was, man, if you're only getting a bunch of points, if you have all of these multiple values in here, is that going to mean that people are going to put items in their projects to up their ranking that they really can't handle because it's a very small group with a very small project? And I thought that was a really good concern. My guess is that this tool will change over time. That is why it lives in the appendices and not in the main body of the CWPP.
Great. And thanks, Lisa, for that recommendation about adding that as a project in itself to maintain and continue that process. We are a little bit behind on time, so I'm going to move us ahead to talk about the results of the risk assessment. And Esther's going to share with us the Wildfire Risk Index. So go ahead, Esther.
Great. So I'll try to go through this quickly. It hasn't changed that much from the last time we saw it. We just put together this graphic just to help show how the different input values were used, and nothing was weighted more or less than the other. Basically, we took the raw values and divided them into 5 quantile classes, usually quantile classes. If it didn't make sense to use quantile classes, then we just used what made sense, or natural breaks. Next slide, please. So you can review what we did. Hopefully I did a good job explaining it. If not, let me know. We already got some feedback on including some definitions on how things were used in this particular Wildfire Risk Index. And I'm calling it a Wildfire Risk Index for several reasons. One is that there's a lot of other people that are doing risk assessments for the county. So NCRP is going to be doing a risk assessment that is going to include Sonoma County. Sonoma Waters Project with CBI is also going to be doing a risk assessment. And so I didn't want to muddy the waters, and I kept this as simple as possible so that it's not conflicting. So it's something that this can consume all of that other data. I'm going to, how about I'll run through it real quick, and Christina, I'll just share my screen again. And of course, I don't have it up. Sorry. So we try to pose everything, with a question: what is this, and how did we do it, and how was it calculated, and what went all in it. So there's explanations at the front, and we can either add text or remove it. It would be nice if someone could read through that and let me know if there's any typos. Again, we've already gotten some good feedback and I'm going to incorporate those changes soon. And then further down, as you scroll through, there's actual maps of each of the inputs. So there's the Wildfire Hazard Index. This is what was used in the multi-jurisdictional and multi-hazard plan for the Sonoma County that just recently got completed. We also included a same metric, but average for each hexagon, 1 mile buffer around each hexagon. And so basically what it does is it just characterizes what the hazard is around each single location, if that makes sense. Hopefully makes sense. So, and we did the exact same thing with the Ember Load Index. So this was data that we got from the recent Pyrologics, all of the data products that were produced by Pyrologics for CAL FIRE. And the Ember Load Index basically just, in the most simplest terms, just indicates where, in relative terms, where the embers are going to land. So they also have a layer where it shows where embers are being produced, and then this particular layer just says where it lands, where they may land, and it's relative, the values. So if you each of these maps are active, you can just click on it and get information. And so the actual number for that particular hexagon is 0.04. That's not particularly meaningful, and so we just classed it. We just indexed them from 1 to 5. So 1 is low and 5 is extreme. And so this particular hexagon that I clicked on has a value of 2. And we did the 1 mile buffer for the ember load index. And then we did structure density, basically. So these hexagons are one acre. So this is the actual count of the number of structures within each of those hexagons. And obviously where there's lots of structures, it gets a higher value. And where there's not very many structures, it gets the lowest, either the lowest value or none. So in places where there were no structures, it doesn't get any value. And we did the 1 mile buffer thing. So again, this is like, even though these places don't have any structures, they may, within 1 mile, they may have a structure. And so it's, it's important, that it may, something that happens within that polygon might influence a location that does have a structure. And then we used the road network rank that Kevin Lacefeld put together for Sonoma County back in 2019, I believe it was. And this was done kind of as an all hazard assessment of the road network. And so it takes in consideration road speed, the number of roads, and the number of lanes, and just to kind of give a sense of how easy it is to get to any particular location in the county. And then we just added those all up, and this is what we ended up with. Oh, and before I totally forgot, one of the things that we might add to this is the climatic water deficit, and that Lisa Michaela has been working with or working on for the past few years. And so we there's still, we haven't reviewed that data yet, but that was one of the things that might get added. And I think that's it. Do we have any questions? I'll go ahead and stop sharing.
And if we can bring up that next slide about the WUI, Esther, and you can explain that.
Ah, yes. Well, the more I think about this, the more I'm not sure that it's that controversial or not controversial, or just maybe not that important. So one of the things that the CAL FIRE, so this is just concerning CAL FIRE's WUI layer. We're not addressing any of the WUI layers that the cities may have developed, that either city of Santa Rosa or Hillsburg, they have their own WUI layers. So this doesn't affect that. So all I did was that, a lot of there's large sections of the county that aren't considered any part of a WUI because it's so far away from places, but we know that fires that either start in the WUI or burn through these non-WUI areas, it do influence. These fires have gotten so large that they do, create an impact of places that are traditionally in the WUI. And so what I did was that for places that CAL FIRE did assign a fire hazard severity zone, we included that in the influence, not the WUI zone, not the traditional WUI, not the interface or the intermix, but their influence zone.
Esther, there's a question in the chat. Are these fire hazard maps based on wildfires driven by extreme winds or more, quote, normal conditions?
So for the fire hazard index, for the Sonoma Wildfire Hazard Index, we used Plan Map to predict fire behavior, and we used, I think, I'd have to go back and look at my notes, but I'm pretty sure it was like the driest of the driest conditions. It was pretty, there were extreme conditions, not normal.
Thank you. And I think we're a little bit behind, so let's hold questions and hear from Carol Leone on the next steps in the public process, and then we'll take the rest of the time for any questions on the risk assessment, risk index, and the public process. So go ahead, Carol Leone.
So with the help of my awesome team, we are moving right along. Esther is hoping to have the draft done by late November, which is where we're going to really want you guys to log in and have a comment. So we'll be pushing the draft out to you sometime in late November and hope to have your comments by December 15th, at which point we want to pass it off to the Board of Supervisors since they're the signatories. We want to make sure that their concerns are included before we start the public meetings in the second or third week of January. And then have a final steering committee meeting late January, February to look at the amended document that has incorporated any comments from the public and the board and anybody else. And we hope to have the whole darn thing signed off and completed by spring of 22. So we're looking good for doing that. So just a heads up, that's where we're going.
Awesome. So any comments or questions on what you've seen on the last few sections between the risk assessment, wildfire risk index, and the process? And actually, Christina, why don't you go back to that last slide so people can still see if they have questions. And go ahead, if you've got questions, either raise your hand or unmute and speak up. You're all just wowed or need caffeine. And I see Paul has added a comment to the chat. So the wildfire risk index is, I think, not new. Some of this is stuff that we've been talking about over the last several months with y'all. Okay, are there any members of the public who are with us who'd like to add comments? I think everybody here is on the steering committee. I'm not exactly sure. But this is the time if anybody's got comments or questions about anything we've discussed today. We've got a few minutes to have an open conversation or answer your questions. Don't be shy. Cool. Well, then I'm going to assume you guys are liking what you've seen so far. And you will be, so be expecting an email from Caroline and Esther in the coming weeks with that link to, either a link to or the draft CWPP for you to review and provide comment by December 15th. And then, you know, as Caroline mentioned, then they're going to be walking the halls with the supervisors so they can know what to expect. And we're expecting to do another set of public meetings like we did in the spring. So one in each district in the second and third weeks of January. Those are going to be evening meetings. I think we decided to do them at 6 o'clock. So folks could do them and get done and have your evening. So with that, just a reminder, you know, with the project book, can you go back to that slide? Thanks. The project ranking tool, you know, take a look at that. Esther posted in the chat the link to the questionnaire if you want to download that and take a look at those and think about that with your projects. If you've got comments on that tool itself, like I think it was Ellie who had one, please get those to Caroline and Esther now. Meanwhile, please start inputting your projects through the website, through the hub site on the project ranking tool. Be looking for the CWPP in late November through December 15th. Then we'll, as I mentioned, we'll be doing those public meetings. And then we're planning to get back together with all of you in late January, early February, probably, I'm guessing probably February, so we can have those public meetings and then summarize that data and let you know what we heard and any changes that we might need to make for the final CWPP. So we actually do have a little bit of time if anybody's got anything else. I did want to mention the permit Sonoma sent out, if you all didn't hear it, just a heads up that they're going to be having a virtual public meeting on November 4th with the Planning Commission to discuss the tree ordinance. It says Planning and Natural Resources staff will share information on the background of the project, local policy and existing regulations, current data collection analysis methods, and next steps for the project. So it's information only, no formal action, but if you're interested, Christina just put the link in the chat, so I assume some of you might be interested in that tree ordinance, which is related to our work. Wow, we might get done early. Anybody have any comments? Don't be shy. Go ahead, Caroline.
I just want to ping in right now and just really encourage you all to make sure and contact us if you have thoughts about what is or isn't included that we haven't talked about in the discussion so far. If you don't contact us, we don't know what you're thinking. So please, I really, really encourage you to pop an email to me. I usually get them and then forward them straight to Esther or anybody that you have, because your input is critical to this project and making sure that your needs and wants are being included. So thank you very much for your participation.
Thanks, Caroline. Esther, do you can you share a link to that updated WUI map you were talking about, or will it just be available in the CWPP document?
At the moment, it's just on my computer, but you know, the cities have their own WUI, or the cities who have developed their own WUI layer, you have to go to the city to get it. The city of Santa Rosa, I think they have the map online somewhere. I'm pretty sure the city of Hillsboroug's the same. So, but I'll compile them and I can put them on the community-based map, and I'll also have it static in the CWPP. But I'll assemble them on the community-based map and forward that to everybody.
And including that new influence zone change that you're suggesting.
Sure. I don't know if that's a quote unquote approved, but I mean, it's up to us whether we want to do that or not.
Anybody have any comments or thoughts on that? And if you want to, you can reach out directly to Esther about it as well. There is a CAL FIRE WUI data layer that you can get off of the FRAP site that shows those 3 levels that Esther was talking about.
Correct.
WUI, intermix, and interface, or intermix, intermix, and then influence. And so what we're suggesting is that influence zone would be larger for this area, for a lot of those areas in Sonoma County. So Ellie, I suggest you might reach out directly to Esther about that. And with that, last call, any comments or questions before we call it an afternoon? Great. Thank you all so much for being here with us today, taking the time to share your thoughts and expertise with us as our subject matter experts in the steering committee, and expect to be hearing from us in a few weeks. And with that, have a lovely afternoon. We'll close the meeting.